Nightmares. They arrive uninvited, gripping us in the dead of night, forcing us into terrifying realms where logic dissolves and fear reigns supreme. We wake up breathless, heart pounding, sweat soaked. But what if these experiences aren't just random misfires of the brain? What if nightmares are more than mere disturbances? What if they are messages, warnings, even lessons? Throughout history, nightmares have been both feared and revered. Ancient civilizations saw them as omens, messages from spirits or glimpses into a darker reality. The Greeks believed in Ephialtes, a demonic entity that crushed its victims in their sleep. In medieval Europe, the mare was a malevolent spirit that sat upon the chest of sleepers, suffocating them. Even today, some who suffer from recurring nightmares claim that these visions feel more real than waking life itself. But nightmares aren't just relics of folklore. Science, psychology, and mythology all converge to suggest that these vivid nocturnal terrors may have a deeper purpose. Are they merely the brain processing trauma, or are they the psyche's way of screaming for attention? Sigmund Freud, in his seminal work The Interpretation of Dreams, proposed that nightmares expose repressed desires, things we cannot consciously acknowledge. Carl Jung, taking a different route, saw nightmares as encounters with the shadow self, the part of us that we suppress, deny, or fear. He believed that confronting the darkness within our dreams was essential for psychological wholeness. And yet, nightmares persist in a way unlike any other dream. Unlike fleeting images of mundane activities, nightmares burn themselves into our memory. Their intensity lingers long after we wake, sometimes haunting us for years. But why? Are nightmares a flaw in the human mind, an evolutionary mistake that causes needless distress? Or do they hold a key to something profound, something we must confront in order to evolve? In this journey, we will dive deep into the world of nightmares, uncovering their psychological, mythological, and scientific dimensions. We will explore what nightmares reveal about us, why they emerge, and how they shape human history, art, and self-perception. By the end, you may never look at nightmares the same way again. Not all dreams are created equal. Some vanish the moment we wake up, slipping through our fingers like water. Others remain, etched into our consciousness, resurfacing unexpectedly, like ghosts haunting the edges of memory. Nightmares belong to this latter category. What sets nightmares apart from ordinary dreams is their emotional intensity. While most dreams may be strange or even unsettling, nightmares leave a visceral imprint, a residue of fear, sorrow, or even existential dread. They are more than just bad dreams. They are experiences so vivid that they force us into a state of wakefulness, sometimes with lingering physical effects, rapid heartbeat, heavy breathing, and an unshakable sense of unease. The term nightmare itself comes from the Old English nightmare, a night goblin or demonic force believed to sit upon the chest of a sleeper, suffocating them. In this sense, a nightmare was not simply a psychological event but a visitation, an assault by something external, something beyond the self. While today we understand nightmares as products of the mind, the haunting nature of these experiences remains unchanged. For centuries, nightmares have been regarded as symptoms, indicators of stress, trauma, or unresolved inner conflicts. Freud, ever fascinated by the unconscious, believed nightmares were the psyche's attempt to express repressed desires and anxieties. To him, even the most terrifying visions were not random but held symbolic meaning, acting as puzzles for the dreamer to decode. The medical world, on the other hand, often treats nightmares as malfunctions, disruptions in the brain's normal sleep processes. Studies in sleep science suggest that nightmares arise primarily during REM sleep, when brain activity mirrors wakefulness. Neurologists have found that heightened amygdala activity, the brain's fear center, plays a critical role in the formation of nightmares, explaining why they feel so emotionally charged. Yet a critical question remains. If nightmares are purely biological in origin, why do they often contain coherent narratives, deeply personal symbols, and recurring themes? If they are just the random firing of neurons, why do they so often speak directly to our greatest fears? This paradox places nightmares at a fascinating crossroads between science and symbolism, neurology, and mythology. Some researchers argue that nightmares serve an adaptive function, an evolutionary warning system that prepares us for danger. Others suggest they may act as psychological pressure valves, releasing pent-up emotions too overwhelming for waking consciousness to process. But if nightmares are messages, then the real question is, are we listening? Imagine walking through a dense forest at night, the path barely visible under the moonlight. Suddenly, a shadow moves in the periphery of your vision. Your heartbeat spikes, your body tenses, and your senses heighten. You are alert, ready to flee or fight. Now imagine that same reaction occurring not in the waking world, but within the landscape of your dreams. This is the function of a nightmare. Nightmares are not arbitrary punishments or meaningless disturbances. They are a kind of psychological alarm system. They emerge when something within us, a fear, a memory, an unresolved emotion, has reached critical mass, demanding our attention. In this sense, nightmares are akin to emergency sirens, blaring in the dead of night to warn us of something we have refused to see. Carl Jung saw nightmares as manifestations of the unconscious mind trying to communicate with us. He argued that when we ignore or suppress certain thoughts in our waking life, they find a way to resurface in our dreams, often in exaggerated, dramatic, or terrifying forms. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate, he wrote. Nightmares, then, are a forceful push toward self-awareness, an unrelenting demand for introspection. But nightmares do not merely signal psychological distress. They expose the fractures in our psyche, highlighting the conflicts we are unwilling to face. Whether it is an unresolved trauma, an existential fear, or a deep-seated insecurity, nightmares force us to look at the aspects of ourselves that we would rather keep buried. Across cultures and individuals, certain recurring nightmare motifs emerge with striking consistency. These archetypal themes suggest that nightmares are not just personal experiences, but part of a broader human psychology. Falling, a sensation of losing control, often reflecting a fear of failure or instability in waking life. Being chased, a common theme where the pursuer is often an aspect of the self we refuse to confront. Teeth falling out, interpreted in various ways, often linked to anxieties about aging, powerlessness, or self-image. Being trapped or paralyzed represents feelings of helplessness, stagnation, or a perceived lack of control. Natural disasters, floods, fires, earthquakes, often symbolic of overwhelming emotions or life upheavals. These motifs are not just random, they carry encoded messages from the unconscious. The question is, how do we decode them? For example, someone who repeatedly dreams of being chased may assume it is simply a reflection of stress. However, a deeper analysis may reveal that the figure chasing them is not an external enemy, but an unacknowledged part of themselves. A nightmare that feels like a terrifying attack may actually be an invitation to confrontation and integration. Many therapists who specialize in dream analysis encourage people to engage with their nightmares rather than flee from them. By analyzing recurring themes and attempting to understand the emotions they evoke, we can begin to decipher the messages they hold. Jung introduced the concept of the shadow, the hidden and often repressed aspects of the self. He argued that the more we deny certain qualities, fear, anger, jealousy, weakness, the stronger they become in the unconscious, eventually breaking through in our dreams. In this sense, nightmares are not cruelties inflicted upon us, but lessons disguised as horror. They reveal what we need to integrate into our consciousness in order to grow. If we ignore them, they return, more vivid and persistent. If we listen, they may guide us towards self-knowledge and healing. This perspective transforms nightmares from sources of dread into opportunities for transformation. Instead of fearing them, we should ask, what is my mind trying to show me? Long before psychological theories attempted to decode nightmares, ancient civilizations had their own explanations for these nocturnal terrors. Many of these accounts did not see nightmares as mere mental phenomena, but as external entities, malevolent beings that invaded the sleeper's mind. One of the oldest and most infamous of these figures is Lilith, a name that has echoed through mythology for millennia. In Jewish folklore, she was said to be Adam's first wife, a woman who refused to submit, who rejected her prescribed role. In response to her defiance, she was cast out of Eden, exiled from paradise, and transformed into a night demon. Her vengeance was relentless. She became a devourer of infants, a seductress of men, and a harbinger of dark dreams. Mothers in ancient Mesopotamia would carve protective amulets to ward off Lilith, believing that she slipped into bedrooms at night, whispering nightmares into the ears of the vulnerable. But what does Lilith represent beyond mythology? Some scholars argue that she is the archetype of the repressed feminine, the embodiment of what patriarchal structures have historically sought to control. In this view, her presence in nightmares could symbolize repressed aspects of desire, power, or independence. For those who have encountered shadowy female figures in their dreams, one must ask, is this a demon? Or is it a forgotten part of oneself, returning for recognition? The word nightmare does not originate from horses, despite the resemblance to mare. Instead, it stems from the Old English mara, a term for a goblin-like creature that would sit on the sleeper's chest, suffocating them as they lay helpless. Variations of this being exist in nearly every culture. The Norse Mara, a spirit that would ride its victims in their sleep, pressing down until they awoke gasping for breath. The German Alp, a nightmare-inducing elf that could enter through the smallest openings, even a keyhole. The Slavic Zmora, a shadowy figure believed to drink the energy of the living while they slept. Though these myths may sound like relics of the past, modern sleep science has uncovered a strikingly similar real-world phenomenon: sleep paralysis. People who experience sleep paralysis often report feeling an overwhelming pressure on their chest, an inability to move, and the sensation of a sinister presence in the room. They see shadowy figures, hear whispering voices, and feel trapped between waking and dreaming. What is particularly eerie is that these experiences align almost perfectly with descriptions of the Mara, the Alp, and the Incubus, suggesting that ancient people were attempting to describe a universal human experience through the lens of folklore. The uncanny similarities between cultures suggest an unsettling possibility. Perhaps nightmares were the birthplace of myth rather than the other way around. If human beings across vastly different civilizations all reported similar creatures, sensations, and fears, is it possible that myths about demons and spirits were merely our ancestors' attempts to describe what they encountered in their dreams? Or could it be that nightmares tap into something even deeper, a collective unconscious, as Jung suggested, where universal fears and archetypes reside? Whatever the case, one thing is clear. Nightmares have always been seen as more than just bad dreams. They have been warnings, omens, hauntings, and confrontations with forces beyond human comprehension. Perhaps we, like our ancestors, have not yet fully grasped their meaning. There are few things as terrifying as being conscious yet utterly powerless. Those who have experienced sleep paralysis describe it as an unsettling liminal state, a place between wakefulness and dreaming where the body is frozen, but the mind is fully aware. What makes it even more disturbing is the uncanny presence of an external force, a shadow in the corner of the room, a whisper that seems to vibrate through the walls, a figure pressing down on the chest, making each breath feel like an impossible feat. Unlike ordinary nightmares, sleep paralysis does not occur within the dream itself. Instead, it unfolds in the very environment where the dreamer has just fallen asleep. The bedroom, the bed, the familiar surroundings, all remain unchanged, yet something is unmistakably wrong. Reality feels distorted, invaded by a presence that defies logic. Although sleep paralysis is now recognized as a neurological condition, caused by a disruption in the sleep cycle, preventing the body from properly transitioning between REM sleep and wakefulness, it has long been explained through supernatural narratives. In nearly every culture, eerie similarities emerge. In Japan, sufferers call upon the kanashibari, meaning bound in metal, the sensation of an unseen force restricting movement. In Turkey, the entity is the Karabasan, a dark figure that descends upon the sleeper, draining their life force. In Brazil, it is known as Pisadeira, an old hag who sits on the victim's chest and steals their breath. In the southern United States, people speak of the witch riding, a belief that an evil spirit has mounted the sleeper, rendering them helpless. Despite these differences in name and detail, one element remains constant: a dark presence, an overwhelming weight, a sense of inescapable doom. Modern neuroscience provides an explanation for the terrifying visions that accompany sleep paralysis. During REM sleep, the brain is highly active, generating vivid imagery. Normally, the body is paralyzed to prevent us from physically acting out our dreams. But when sleep paralysis occurs, something goes wrong. The mind becomes alert before the body regains control, leaving the sleeper trapped in a state of sensory confusion. This confusion is what triggers hallucinations. The brain, desperate to rationalize the paralysis, creates a presence, something external that explains the feeling of being trapped. What emerges from the darkness is not random. It is shaped by deep-seated fears, cultural beliefs, and the unconscious mind's most repressed contents. In an interview, neurologist Dr. Balan Jalal described how these hallucinations are not simply imaginary figures but projections of the brain's own expectations. When we feel vulnerable, the mind constructs a figure to embody that vulnerability. The more fear we experience, the more real this figure becomes. In other words, sleep paralysis is a mirror of our own anxieties, a psychological theater where the deepest fears of the unconscious take form. For those who experience this phenomenon repeatedly, the question is inevitable: can one escape? While waking up fully is often difficult, certain strategies have proven effective. Some sleepers focus on wiggling a single finger or toe, slowly regaining control of their body. Others concentrate on regulating their breathing, using it as a grounding mechanism to reconnect with reality. Intriguingly, some individuals have learned to use sleep paralysis as a gateway into lucid dreaming. Rather than fighting against the paralysis, they surrender to it, allowing their consciousness to slip fully into the dream world. This raises an interesting possibility. What if sleep paralysis is not just a glitch in the brain, but a door, one that can be opened with the right key? Every night, as we close our eyes and drift into unconsciousness, the brain embarks on a meticulously structured journey through distinct sleep stages. This process, though seemingly passive, is an intricate neurological symphony, shifting between cycles of non-rapid eye movement, NRM, and rapid eye movement, REM sleep. The initial descent into sleep begins with stage 1 NREM, a light state where consciousness still flickers, allowing for hypnagogic hallucinations, those strange dreamlike visions experienced just before slumber fully takes hold. Stage 2 follows, deepening relaxation as the body cools and heart rate slows. Then comes stage 3, the profound restorative phase where the body repairs itself. It is here that sleepwalking night terrors and other parasomnias often occur, originating from a region of the brain that has not yet synchronized with full unconsciousness. Only after cycling through these stages does the brain transition into REM sleep, the domain of dreams. Unlike the previous phases, in which the body enters a state of physiological rest, REM sleep activates the brain almost as intensely as wakefulness. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought, remains subdued, allowing bizarre, non-linear narratives to unfold freely. Dreams occur in every stage of sleep, but nightmares, particularly those most vivid and distressing, almost exclusively manifest in REM sleep's later cycles. By this point, the brain has consolidated memories, processed daytime emotions, and begun to confront unresolved psychological material. Nightmares, then, are not arbitrary disruptions, but deliberate psychological expressions, often emerging from latent fears, stressors, or past traumas. Interestingly, not all nightmares are equal. While some are fleeting disturbances caused by temporary stress, others take on the structure of recurring narratives, stories the brain retells in different variations, as though searching for resolution. Dr. Matthew Walker, a leading sleep scientist, argues in his book Why We Sleep, nightmares are not simply distressing dreams. They are the mind's desperate attempt to problem-solve emotional wounds, an unfiltered exposure therapy performed by the unconscious. In other words, nightmares strip away the distractions of daily life, presenting psychological dilemmas in their rawest form. Neuroscientists have pinpointed key areas of the brain responsible for generating nightmares. One of the most crucial is the amygdala, the brain's fear processing center. Studies show that during nightmares, the amygdala exhibits heightened activity, reinforcing the emotional intensity of dream scenarios. This aligns with evolutionary psychology. Our ancestors relied on vivid fear responses to prepare for real-world dangers. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which governs logical reasoning, remains largely inactive during REM sleep. This explains why nightmares often defy logic, yet feel completely real. The conscious mind lacks the ability to question their absurdity. Meanwhile, the hippocampus, the region associated with memory, weaves real-life experiences into the dream narrative. This is why fragments of past trauma, deep-seated anxieties, or unprocessed emotions resurface in terrifying, often exaggerated dreamscapes. Far from being random byproducts of sleep, nightmares may have played a crucial role in human survival. The threat simulation theory, proposed by cognitive scientist Antti Revonsuo, suggests that nightmares evolved as mental rehearsals for real-life dangers. In this view, nightmares serve as training simulations, allowing the brain to practice responses to threatening situations. This hypothesis is supported by research indicating that children, who are still developing cognitive and emotional regulation, experience nightmares more frequently than adults. Their developing minds may be using nightmares as a primitive defense mechanism, teaching them how to process fear. However, in modern society, the threats we face are often psychological rather than physical. Instead of nightmares about predators lurking in the dark, people today report dreams of failing at work, being trapped in meaningless routines, or confronting unresolved conflicts. The mechanism remains the same, but the nature of the threats has evolved. For some, nightmares cease to be a natural regulatory function and instead become an ongoing affliction. This is particularly true for those suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Unlike standard nightmares, PTSD-related dreams are highly repetitive and often replay the original traumatic event with little variation. Studies show that in PTSD patients, the brain fails to properly process traumatic memories, causing them to re-emerge during sleep. The usual mechanism that integrates emotions and memories during REM sleep becomes disrupted, resulting in dreams that feel more like involuntary flashbacks than symbolic narratives. In these cases, nightmare therapy is not just about interpreting dream symbolism. It is about helping the brain reprocess trauma in a way that reduces its psychological grip. Techniques such as imagery rehearsal therapy, IRT, where the individual rewrites their nightmares ending while awake, have shown promise in reducing nightmare frequency in trauma survivors. Another curious category of nightmares arises not from psychological distress, but from illness. Fever dreams, often surreal, fragmented, and deeply unsettling, occur when the body's temperature rises beyond normal levels, affecting the brain's ability to regulate sleep cycles. People often report fever dreams as being hyper-realistic yet warped, featuring themes of disorientation, suffocation, or endless repetition. This aligns with what neuroscientists call spatial distortion, where the fevered brain struggles to process sensory information correctly. In one study, participants who were induced into mild fever states before sleep reported dreams of being trapped, chased, or experiencing time loops. Fever, it seems, creates the perfect conditions for the mind to distort reality, amplifying nightmarish qualities. Despite their unsettling nature, nightmares may be one of the most powerful tools the mind has for self-exploration. Whether as an evolutionary defense mechanism, a psychological regulator, or an emotional processing tool, nightmares act as a direct line to the unconscious, offering insights that conscious thought often resists. The question, then, is not whether nightmares should be eradicated, but whether we should learn to listen to them more closely. Throughout history, nightmares have provided fertile ground for literature, becoming a narrative device through which authors explore psychological dissent, existential horror, and moral dilemmas. The written word has long served as a means of exercising personal fears, and some of the most influential works in literary history owe their haunting atmospheres to the author's own nocturnal visions. Dostoevsky, Kafka, Poe, each of them translated subconscious terror into ink, shaping stories that reflect our deepest anxieties. These authors, however, did not merely depict nightmares. They used them as structural and symbolic elements, revealing the profound connection between dreaming and storytelling. The psychological weight of nightmares in literature goes beyond simple horror. Rather than relying on overt supernatural elements, authors often use dreamlike sequences to blur the boundary between reality and fiction, evoking a sense of existential unease. Nightmares become more than fleeting anxieties. They manifest as inescapable conditions of the human experience. One of the most haunting uses of nightmares in literature comes from Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, a novel that explores morality, guilt, and psychological torment. The protagonist, Raskolnikov, experiences a series of disturbing dreams, each one acting as a prelude to his own inner downfall. Perhaps the most famous of these dreams occurs before Raskolnikov commits murder. He dreams of a young boy witnessing the brutal beating of a horse, a visceral metaphor for powerlessness and cruelty. The imagery is disturbingly vivid. The horse flinches under repeated blows, its suffering ignored by the intoxicated crowd. The young boy, Raskolnikov himself, watches in horror, unable to intervene. When he awakens, he is drenched in sweat, overwhelmed by the nightmare's emotional residue. He initially interprets it as an omen, a warning against the crime he is about to commit. Yet just hours later, he carries out his gruesome plan, proving that nightmares, even when understood, do not always deter one's path toward destruction. This passage is a brilliant psychological study. Dostoevsky demonstrates how nightmares function as expressions of moral conflict. The dream is not random. It is Raskolnikov's unconscious mind screaming for attention, manifesting the guilt he refuses to acknowledge while awake. Psychologists today would recognize this as a prime example of pre-traumatic stress, an individual experiencing symptoms of psychological distress before committing an irreversible act. If Dostoevsky explored the nightmare of guilt, Franz Kafka embodied the nightmare of existential dread. His works, particularly The Trial and The Metamorphosis, do not merely include nightmares. They are nightmares in narrative form. In The Trial, the protagonist, Joseph K., wakes up to find himself arrested for an unspecified crime. As the story unfolds, he becomes entangled in a labyrinthine legal system where nothing is explained, and every attempt at reasoning leads only to deeper confusion. Kafka's storytelling is suffocatingly dreamlike, capturing the sense of helplessness that defines the worst nightmares. Unlike Raskolnikov, who wrestles with a moral decision, Joseph K. is thrust into an incomprehensible world, a prisoner of a logic that remains just beyond his grasp. This mirrors what many people report in nightmares, an overwhelming sense of frustration, of trying to solve a problem that continuously reshapes itself. Psychologists today recognize dreams of being trapped, chased, or lost as some of the most universally experienced nightmare motifs. Similarly, The Metamorphosis takes an even more surreal approach. Gregor Samsa awakes to find himself transformed into a monstrous insect, an event that is both absurd and horrifying. Yet what makes the novel truly nightmarish is not the transformation itself, but the indifferent reaction of his family. Kafka's works are an embodiment of what psychoanalysts call the unheimlich, uncanny, a state in which something is simultaneously familiar and alien. His stories create a lingering psychological discomfort, a feeling that something intangible and terrifying is just beneath the surface of reality. What do these literary nightmares tell us? Beyond their entertainment value, they serve as case studies of the unconscious mind. They externalize fears that are difficult to articulate and provide a safe space to explore distressing emotions. Literature, in this sense, becomes an extension of dream analysis. The symbols within these stories, whether a murdered horse, an inscrutable trial, or an insect-like body, are expressions of collective psychological truths. They depict the nightmares that linger not just in individuals, but in societies. Psychoanalyst James Hillman once wrote, "Nightmares in literature are more than mere reflections of fear. They are symptoms of something unresolved, something unprocessed in the human condition." A great story does not merely tell us what we already know, it reveals the conflicts we refuse to face. The nightmare motifs found in literature are not confined to fiction. They have been rigorously studied in modern psychology. Researchers have identified recurring patterns in nightmares that mirror the themes found in literature, suggesting that these fears are deeply embedded in the human psyche. One particularly fascinating study analyzed thousands of recorded nightmares and found that the most common themes involve loss of control, isolation, pursuit, and transformation. Precisely the anxieties that authors like Dostoevsky and Kafka captured in their works. In therapy, reading and discussing literary nightmares has even been used as a technique for trauma processing. Stories allow people to reframe their own fears through the lens of fiction, making them more approachable and less overwhelming. One could argue that literature's greatest nightmares often emerge during historical periods of uncertainty. Consider how Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment in the shadow of radical social upheaval in Russia, where the morality of justice was being deeply questioned. Kafka's stories reflect the bureaucratic oppression of early 20th century Europe, a period marked by increasing alienation and faceless authority. Post-war literature embraced the absurd and nightmarish, reflecting the existential dread caused by mass destruction and ideological collapse. This suggests that nightmares, whether personal or societal, are not merely passive experiences but signals of deeper unrest. They reveal what a culture fears most at any given time. Many great authors, particularly those drawn to themes of psychological horror and surrealism, were plagued by persistent nightmares. H.P. Lovecraft, for example, suffered from night terrors throughout his life, and he directly credited his most unsettling stories to the visions he experienced in sleep. Even Carl Jung, who devoted his career to dream analysis, admitted that some of his most profound insights came not from waking thought, but from nightmares so vivid they bordered on hallucination. It raises an intriguing question. Does creativity require confrontation with fear? Do the most visionary minds draw their inspiration from the unconscious depths others fear to explore? If nightmares serve an evolutionary function, forcing the dreamer to confront suppressed emotions, then perhaps literature, as an extension of this process, allows entire societies to collectively process their fears through storytelling. For Carl Jung, dreams were not meaningless fragments of thought, nor were they simply the residue of daily experiences. Instead, he saw them as the natural expressions of the psyche, a communication from the unconscious that revealed aspects of the self obscured from waking awareness. Unlike Freud, who viewed dreams primarily as wish fulfillment, Jung argued that they served a self-regulatory function, compensating for blind spots in conscious perception. Nightmares, in this framework, were neither random disturbances nor purely pathological symptoms. Instead, they were urgent messages from the unconscious, demanding attention. When the conscious mind strays too far from an essential truth, whether personal or collective, the unconscious sends a wake-up call in the form of a nightmare. Jung noted that nightmares often contained archetypal symbols, images deeply embedded in the human psyche. These symbols could be personal, reflecting an individual's unresolved conflicts, or collective, tapping into universal patterns of human experience. Among Jung's most significant contributions to psychology was his concept of the shadow, the hidden, often repressed aspect of one's personality. The shadow contains traits we deny, emotions we reject, and impulses we suppress. And yet, despite being ignored, it remains an active force in our inner world. Jung described the shadow as an essential part of psychological wholeness, but also as a force that could become destructive if unacknowledged. Nightmares frequently manifest the shadow in its most terrifying form. A pursuer we cannot escape, a faceless entity lurking in the dark, a monstrous being that defies understanding. A recurring theme in Jungian analysis is that avoiding the shadow only gives it more power. A nightmare where one is being chased, for example, suggests that there is an aspect of the self that is being ignored or denied. The more one resists acknowledging it, the stronger and more menacing it becomes in the dream world. However, nightmares also offer an opportunity for integration. If the dreamer turns to face the shadow rather than flee from it, something remarkable often happens. The terrifying figure loses its hostility, transforms into a guide, or even dissolves entirely. In this way, nightmares reveal a paradox. What we fear most is often what we need to embrace. As Jung put it, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When the unconscious sends a message that is ignored, it does not simply disappear. Instead, it repeats itself, often with increasing intensity. This is why some people experience the same nightmare repeatedly, sometimes over the course of years. A nightmare that recurs is a sign that something remains unresolved. In Jungian terms, the psyche is insisting that attention be paid. Ignoring these messages in waking life may result in them becoming more severe in the dream world. For example, a woman plagued by nightmares of drowning in dark water sought therapy after years of experiencing the same terrifying vision. In waking life, she avoided confrontation and buried emotions of grief and loss. Through analysis, she discovered that the water represented the depth of her unprocessed emotions. The more she resisted facing her grief, the stronger the dream became. However, once she engaged in emotional work, the nightmare shifted. Rather than drowning, she began to swim. Jungian psychology suggests that nightmares evolve in response to our willingness or unwillingness to engage with them. Their persistence is not an act of cruelty from the unconscious, but a sign of psychic necessity. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of psychological development was individuation, the process of integrating the various aspects of the psyche into a cohesive and balanced whole. Nightmares, while distressing, often serve as milestones in this journey, marking moments of transformation. This can be seen in major life transitions, such as adolescence, midlife, or significant personal crises. A person undergoing a career shift might experience nightmares of being lost in an unfamiliar city, symbolizing their uncertainty about the new path. Someone facing deep personal growth may dream of a death, a common motif representing the end of an old identity and the beginning of a new one. Jungian analysts often encourage engagement with nightmares rather than avoidance. This may involve active imagination, journaling, or symbolic interpretation. The key insight is that nightmares are not punishments. They are messages, and understanding them can lead to profound self-discovery. Despite interpreting thousands of dreams throughout his life, Jung himself reported experiencing very few nightmares. He attributed this to his willingness to engage directly with his unconscious mind. During a period of intense psychological crisis, Jung developed the method of active imagination, where he deliberately entered into dialogue with unconscious figures while awake. This allowed him to process the material of nightmares without needing them to manifest in sleep. For those who frequently suffer from nightmares, this suggests a compelling insight. Bringing unconscious material to light in waking life may reduce the need for the psyche to express itself through distressing dreams. Nightmares, though often perceived as tormenting intrusions, can be reframed as portals to self-awareness. Rather than dismissing them as psychological noise, what if we viewed them as signposts guiding us toward unresolved conflicts, hidden fears, or unacknowledged desires? While they may appear as punishments, their real function is instructional, a subconscious demand to pay attention. Many therapeutic approaches now recognize nightmares as valuable psychological material. The question is not merely how to rid oneself of them, but how to engage with them productively. The key lies in active participation rather than passive avoidance. One of the most intriguing methods developed by Jung to work with unconscious material was active imagination. This technique involves consciously interacting with dream figures while awake, allowing the psyche to reveal its intentions in a controlled environment. Rather than simply recalling a nightmare, the dreamer deliberately re-enters the dream in a waking state, visualizing the scene and engaging in dialogue with the figures that appear. This can be done through writing, painting, or visualization. The goal is not to control the dream, but to let it unfold organically while staying fully conscious. For example, if someone frequently dreams of being chased by a dark figure, active imagination encourages them to stop running and ask the figure why it is pursuing them. Often, what initially seems like a threat transforms into a guide, revealing insights that were previously obscured by fear. Jung himself practiced active imagination extensively, documenting his experiences in the Red Book. He believed that direct engagement with the unconscious allowed for psychic integration, reducing the need for distressing dreams to communicate urgent messages. While active imagination takes place in a waking state, lucid dreaming offers a way to transform nightmares from within. In a lucid dream, the dreamer becomes aware that they are dreaming, allowing them to interact with the dream consciously. Research has shown that lucid dreamers can reshape nightmares into meaningful encounters, altering their narratives in real time. A person experiencing a recurring nightmare of falling might, upon becoming lucid, choose to spread their arms and glide instead of crashing. Another facing an aggressive pursuer might turn and engage in conversation rather than fleeing. For centuries, Tibetan Buddhist traditions have included dream yoga, a practice that involves cultivating lucidity to gain insight into the nature of the mind. Modern psychological research supports the idea that lucid dreaming can be a therapeutic tool, particularly for individuals suffering from post-traumatic nightmares. One documented case involved a woman who suffered from recurrent nightmares of being trapped in a burning house. Through lucid dreaming, she trained herself to recognize the pattern and, upon realizing she was dreaming, visualized herself stepping through the flames unharmed. Over time, the nightmares ceased. Some of the most visionary works of art, literature, and film have their origins in nightmares. Writers, musicians, and visual artists frequently describe moments of creative revelation emerging from unsettling dreams. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was famously inspired by a vivid nightmare in which she saw a grotesque figure brought to life by unnatural means. Similarly, H.P. Lovecraft's nightmarish landscapes, filled with cosmic horrors beyond human comprehension, were drawn from his own intensely vivid and often terrifying dreams. The Swiss artist H.R. Giger, known for designing the biomechanical aesthetic of Alien, channeled his nightmares into disturbing yet mesmerizing artworks. His work illustrates how confronting the darkness of the unconscious can lead to profound artistic breakthroughs. Psychologists have noted that highly creative individuals often experience more frequent and intense nightmares, possibly due to their heightened sensitivity to unconscious material. Rather than suppressing these visions, they transform them into symbolic expressions, bridging the unconscious and the waking world. Another effective way to alter the impact of nightmares is through narrative therapy, a technique that involves rewriting the nightmare's storyline to change its emotional impact. This approach is particularly useful for trauma survivors who suffer from repetitive, distressing dreams. By consciously reconstructing the nightmare's ending, either through visualization or writing, the dreamer shifts their relationship with it. For instance, a man who constantly dreamed of being helplessly trapped in a collapsing tunnel was encouraged to rewrite the scenario, imagining that he found an exit just in time. Over weeks of practicing this technique, the nightmare began to change, eventually transforming into a dream where he found himself escaping effortlessly into the light. The effectiveness of narrative therapy lies in its ability to reframe the dreamer's perception of fear, altering its psychological significance. The subconscious no longer sees the scenario as a closed loop of terror, but as a challenge that can be overcome. Ultimately, the goal is not to eliminate nightmares entirely, but to develop a more conscious relationship with them. When approached with curiosity rather than avoidance, nightmares can reveal critical truths about the psyche. By engaging with them, through active imagination, lucid dreaming, creative transformation, or narrative therapy, what once seemed like a terrifying enemy becomes an unexpected guide towards self-awareness. As the French philosopher Gaston Bachelard once wrote, "A nightmare is a drama of the soul, a moment of deep reckoning, but within it lies the opportunity to rewrite the self." The image of the mother is deeply embedded in the human psyche, carrying both nurturing and terrifying aspects. From the moment of birth, the maternal figure represents protection, warmth, and nourishment. Yet within this very presence lies the potential for suffocation, regression, or destruction. This dual nature, the benevolent and the devouring mother, has shaped myths, legends, and psychological theories for centuries. Carl Jung identified the Great Mother archetype as one of the most fundamental forces in the collective unconscious. She is the source of life, but also the abyss into which one can be swallowed. Nightmares often embody this paradox, trapping the dreamer in claustrophobic spaces, endless labyrinths, or oppressive darkness, reflecting an unconscious fear of regression or annihilation. Across cultures, the terrifying face of the maternal archetype appears as a monstrous, consuming force. In Hindu mythology, the goddess Kali is depicted with a necklace of skulls, a symbol of both destruction and renewal. She embodies the raw, primal power of the unconscious, fearsome yet necessary for transformation. In Western tradition, the Gorgon Medusa petrifies those who gaze upon her, a metaphor for the paralyzing grip of fear. In many cases, these figures serve as representations of psychological forces within the dreamer, externalized into terrifying forms. Many recurring nightmares revolve around being trapped, smothered, or swallowed, themes that mirror the fear of being consumed by the unconscious, losing individuality, or being unable to escape the maternal grasp. The shadow side of the mother archetype often manifests in dreams where the dreamer is paralyzed, buried alive, or held captive by an unseen force. In nightmares, spaces themselves carry meaning. A small narrow room or a cave with no exit may represent the unconscious urge to retreat into childlike dependency, while simultaneously symbolizing the fear of stagnation and helplessness. These dreams often signal internal conflict, a struggle between the safety of regression and the necessity of growth. For some, the ultimate nightmare is drowning, often in dark, endless waters. This represents a return to the primordial womb, a place where individual identity dissolves. While some interpret this as a symbol of transformation, for others, it reflects the terror of being lost within the vast, unknowable forces of the psyche. The ocean, deep forests, or mazes in nightmares can act as archetypal landscapes, signifying the maternal unconscious, a place that simultaneously promises rebirth and obliteration. Jungian psychologist Erich Neumann explored this paradox in The Great Mother, describing how the path to individuation requires moving beyond the maternal embrace. While the nurturing mother provides a foundation for life, an overbearing presence, whether external or internal, can create an unconscious resistance to personal growth. Nightmares serve as a wake-up call, warning against stagnation. The repeated theme of entrapment, helplessness, or suffocation often signals the need for separation, autonomy, and conscious confrontation with the forces keeping one tied to the past. Those who repeatedly experience these motifs in dreams may find resolution through symbolic acts of separation, breaking free from a captor, finding a hidden exit, or even facing the terrifying mother figure directly. Such dreams, though distressing, can mark the beginning of psychological transformation. Not all encounters with the maternal archetype in nightmares are destructive. Some experiences, while unsettling, signal rebirth rather than regression. Dreams of descending into a cave and emerging into the light often indicate a deep psychological shift, where confronting the darker aspects of the unconscious leads to greater self-awareness. The Great Mother is both destroyer and creator, and whether the nightmare reflects one or the other depends largely on the dreamer's stage of psychological development. Those who resist change may find themselves trapped within the suffocating grasp of the nightmare, while those who embrace transformation may instead experience a symbolic rebirth, emerging stronger, wiser, and more whole. As Carl Jung once wrote, "Only that which can destroy itself is truly alive." Nightmares are rarely meaningless. They are not merely chaotic visions conjured by an overactive brain, but rather intricate reflections of our deepest fears, unresolved conflicts, and subconscious truths. If regular dreams whisper, nightmares shout, demanding attention, shaking us from psychological complacency, and compelling us to confront aspects of ourselves we might prefer to ignore. Many spend their lives avoiding these nocturnal encounters, dismissing them as random disturbances. Yet those who dare to listen may uncover insights far more valuable than the fleeting discomfort of fear. Throughout history, fear has been a powerful motivator, driving survival, innovation, and self-discovery. In the realm of the unconscious, fear acts as a psychological compass, pointing directly at the aspects of our psyche that require attention. Jung described the individuation process as a journey toward wholeness, where the confrontation with the shadow, often appearing in the form of nightmares, is essential for self-integration. Ignoring these messages does not erase their significance. Rather, it strengthens the hold of repressed content over the psyche, leading to anxiety, self-doubt, or stagnation. Instead of seeing nightmares as obstacles to restful sleep, they can be approached as keys to self-awareness. Each terrifying vision carries a piece of the puzzle, an invitation to decode, process, and ultimately transcend our limitations. The process of interpreting nightmares is deeply personal, as no two dreamers share the same internal landscape. However, some guiding principles can help transform these night visions from sources of fear into tools for growth. Recognizing patterns. Recurring nightmares often signal persistent emotional conflicts. Identifying these repetitions can reveal the core issue the unconscious is trying to bring into awareness. Engaging with symbols. Instead of recoiling from a nightmare's imagery, question its meaning. Who or what is the pursuer? What does the environment represent? Shifting perspective. Some of the most profound transformations occur when a dreamer ceases to run from the nightmare and instead turns to face it. In doing so, the terrifying figure may dissolve, reveal its true nature, or even become an ally. This shift in approach requires a certain courage and openness, but those who embrace it often report profound psychological relief, newfound clarity, and even a reduction in the frequency of nightmares. In various cultures, nightmares have long been seen as messengers, guiding individuals through rites of passage, personal trials, and spiritual awakenings. The ancient Greeks consulted dreams at the temples of Asclepius, seeking visions that would heal the body and soul. Many indigenous traditions treat nightmares as encounters with spirit guides, challenging, yet ultimately instructive. Even today, those who actively explore their dreams often find that the most terrifying nightmares mark the threshold of significant personal growth. Fear, in this sense, is not an enemy. It is a signal, a call to action from the depths of the unconscious. A final question: what are your nightmares telling you? We have traveled through the psychological, mythological, and scientific dimensions of nightmares. We have explored their origins, their terrifying imagery, and their role in personal transformation. Yet, in the end, the most important question is the one you must ask yourself. What is my unconscious trying to tell me? Rather than fearing nightmares, consider embracing them. Journal them. Analyze them. Engage with them. They may hold the answers to questions you never even thought to ask. And so the next time you wake in the dark, heart pounding, breath unsteady, pause for a moment. Before dismissing the experience as meaningless terror, ask yourself, what if this nightmare is trying to save me? If you've ever had a nightmare that stayed with you, share it in the comments. What do you think it meant? Subscribe for more deep explorations into the hidden world of the mind. Until next time.